A few months ago, my son came to me with an idea. He said, "Dad, you talk about this stuff all the time. The philosophy, the stoicism. Why you think people are exhausted? Why the modern world is broken in certain ways? You talk about it at dinner, on walks, in the car. Why don't you just say it on camera?" I told him I was too busy. 5 channels already in Hungarian, a family to support, a back injury that makes sitting for long hours genuinely painful. The kind of pain that starts in your lower spine and radiates down your leg, that shows up in MRI scans as something with a Latin name that essentially means your body is staging a quiet protest against everything you've been doing for the last 15 years. He didn't give up. He said, "I'll record the gameplay. You write the words. We do it together." And I sat with that for a while, because it was my 12-year-old offering me something, a collaboration, an idea, a push. And I noticed my first instinct was to find reasons to say no. Too busy, not the right time, other priorities. Which is funny, because the thing I've been thinking about and reading about and talking about for the last decade is exactly that kind of avoidance. The way we bury real things under practical objections. The way "I don't have time" is almost never actually about time. So I said yes. My son plays Roblox. I think about Epictetus. And somehow, in 2026, that combination makes more sense than it probably should. This is the first video on this channel, and I want to start with something that has been sitting in my head for a long time. Something I've talked about in my own language, Hungarian, for years. On 5 different channels, for different audiences, approaching the same questions from different angles. But now, in English, for the first time, to a different audience, maybe wider, maybe not, but honest in the same way. Here's the question I want to start with. It sounds simple. It isn't. You are free. More free than any human being who has ever lived on this planet. You can travel almost anywhere. You can say almost anything. You can buy something at 3 in the morning from a device in your pocket and have it delivered before you wake up. You can access every piece of music ever recorded, every film ever made, every book ever written. You can build a business from a bedroom. You can talk in real time to someone on the other side of the planet. The amount of freedom available to you, right now, today, would have been literally incomprehensible to a human being 500 years ago, 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. And yet, anxiety is at historic highs. Loneliness is at historic highs. Depression is at historic highs. A significant portion of the population in wealthy, free, comfortable countries reports feeling like something essential is missing. Like they're running but not arriving anywhere. Like they're busy but not alive. So why? Why does so much freedom produce so much feeling of being trapped? That's what this video is about. And it's a long one, because this question deserves more than a 5-minute answer. Get comfortable. Let's think through this together. Let me describe a morning, not a fictional morning, a real one. Probably yours, at least in parts. The alarm goes off, or maybe you wake up before it, the way you do when your body has been in a light, anxious sleep, waiting for the day to start demanding things. Before your feet touch the floor, the phone is in your hand. You didn't decide to do that. That's the first thing worth noticing. There was no decision, it just happened. The way your hand reaches for the phone has the quality of a reflex now, not a choice. Like pulling your hand away from a hot stove. Automatic, below the level of conscious thought. And in the first 60 seconds of your day, before coffee, before you've said a word to anyone, before you've even fully remembered what day it is, you've already processed somewhere between 20 and 50 pieces of information. Someone got engaged. Someone you vaguely know bought a house. A news story designed to produce outrage, and it works. You feel the familiar tightening. An ad for something you were talking about yesterday, which is either coincidence or evidence of something you don't want to think about too early in the morning. Someone left a comment on something you posted, a message you need to respond to, another message you've been avoiding. Your nervous system, which should be slowly warming up from sleep, is already in reaction mode, already comparing, already slightly behind, already carrying something, a low-level static of anxiety that you couldn't name if someone asked you to, but that is unmistakably there. And this is before breakfast. Now tell me, is that a free person? Technically, yes. No one forced you to pick up the phone. You live in a society where you can, legally and practically, do almost anything you want. You have rights, you have choices, you have options that previous generations couldn't have imagined. And yet, there's something about that morning moment, that automatic, half-asleep reach, that feels less like freedom and more like compulsion, like the behavior of someone who is managed by something external rather than guided by something internal. And I think this is the central confusion of our time, the confusion between external freedom and internal freedom. We've spent the last 200 years, as societies, as cultures, as political movements, fighting for external freedom, the right to speak, to vote, to travel, to work, to own, to marry whoever you want, to be whoever you are. And these were real fights, important fights, many of them still ongoing. But in the process, we almost entirely missed the other kind of freedom, the inner kind, the kind that determines not what you're allowed to do, but whether you actually experience your own life, whether you're present in it, whether the choices you make come from somewhere real inside you, or whether they come from the constant pressure of external signals, comparison, anxiety, the need for validation, the fear of missing out, the relentless suggestion that whoever you are right now is not quite enough. That second kind of freedom, internal freedom, is almost never discussed, because it doesn't have a political movement, it doesn't generate revenue, it can't be packaged and sold, and it requires something that the modern economy is specifically and systematically designed to prevent. It requires stillness. I came to Stoic philosophy relatively late. I want to be clear about that, because I'm not standing here as someone who figured this out early and has had a smooth ride ever since. I made real mistakes, significant ones. In my 20s, I started a business with my best friend, a restaurant. We put everything into it: time, money, energy, the friendship itself. We thought friendship meant we'd be honest with each other. We thought trust meant we didn't need formal agreements. We thought passion would compensate for planning. All of those things turned out to be wrong. The business failed within the year, and the friendship didn't survive the failure. There were accusations, blame, silence. The kind of silence that starts as a pause and becomes permanent. For a long time afterward, longer than I'd like to admit, I told the story a certain way. A way where the weight of the failure landed mostly on the other side, where I was somewhat the victim of someone else's mistakes, someone else's choices, someone else's failure to come through. That story was comfortable. It protected my self-image. It let me avoid looking too directly at my own role. But it was also a trap, because as long as the failure belonged mostly to someone else, I couldn't learn from it. I couldn't see clearly what I had done or failed to do that contributed to the outcome. And so I kept some version of those same patterns, the same avoidances, the same blind spots. It was somewhere in my early 30s, in the middle of another difficult period, that I picked up Marcus Aurelius, then Epictetus. And I had one of those uncomfortable moments of recognition, where someone who lived 2,000 years ago, who had no electricity, no internet, No modern psychology, no therapy industry, no self-help section in any bookstore describes your inner life more accurately than you've been able to describe it yourself. That's what good philosophy does. It doesn't give you new information, it holds up a mirror. And what you see in that mirror is not always comfortable, but it is useful. Let me say something about where I'm speaking from, because I think context matters. I'm 38 years old. I live in Hungary, in a small town. I have 3 sons, 12, 9, and 3 years old, and I am the sole financial provider for my family. 5 people and 2 cats and a dog depend on what I do. 5 people and 2 cats and a dog depend on what I do. I run 5 YouTube channels in Hungarian. Different niches, different audiences, same underlying obsessions. Philosophy, minimalism, meaning. How to live with more clarity and less noise. I've built these from nothing over several years, through trial and error and more failure than success, while dealing with a spine that generates a constant low-level argument about whether I should be sitting down. I am not a philosopher. I have no academic credentials in this area. I'm not a therapist, a life coach, or someone who has achieved some elevated state of enlightenment. I'm an ordinary man who thinks about these things constantly, who has tested Stoic ideas against real life, not philosophical thought experiments, but actual difficulty, and found them useful. Not magic, not a cure for everything, but genuinely useful. And now, because my 12-year-old pushed me, I'm saying it in English. To whoever is watching, whether you're 19 and things feel confusing, or you're 35 and things feel stuck, or you're 50 and you're wondering how you ended up here, I think the questions are the same. The noise is the same. The confusion between outer freedom and inner experience is the same. Let's keep going. Epictetus was born a slave. I want to stay with that for a moment, because we tend to move past it too quickly. We say born a slave, and we acknowledge it intellectually, and then we move on to his ideas, as if the circumstances of his life were just biographical background. They weren't. They were the laboratory in which his philosophy was developed. Every idea he produced was tested against the most extreme version of external constraint imaginable. He did not theorize about freedom from a comfortable study. He thought about freedom while being owned. His full name wasn't even his. The name Epictetus is Greek for acquired, a slave name given to him by someone else. He was born in Hierapolis, in what is now Turkey, sometime around 50 AD. He was brought to Rome as a slave, where he eventually came to be owned by Epictetus, a freedman who had himself been a slave of Emperor Nero, and who was known, the historical record suggests this, for cruelty. There's a story, probably apocryphal but worth considering. Epictetus was twisting Epictetus's leg, torturing him essentially. Epictetus is said to have calmly said, "You're going to break it." When the leg broke, "Didn't I tell you?" No rage, no begging, no collapse. Now, I want to be honest about how strange that sounds to a modern ear. We hear that story and part of us thinks, that's not admirable, that's just dissociation. That's someone who has been so broken by their circumstances that they've detached from their own pain. But I don't think that's what was happening. I think what Epictetus demonstrated in that moment, and what he taught for the rest of his life, was something genuinely different. Not the absence of feeling, not emotional numbness, something more like a complete distinction between what is happening to your body and what is happening to your mind. His body could be broken. It was. His circumstances could be entirely outside his control. They were. But his judgment, his response, his interpretation of events, that remained his. And he decided, through what must have been enormous internal work, that he would not give that away. That no matter what was done to him physically, the inside would remain his territory. He was eventually freed. We don't know exactly how or when, and he became a teacher. He established a school in Nicopolis, in what is now Greece. He taught for decades. He wrote nothing himself. Everything we have comes from his student Arian, who took notes and compiled them into two works, the Discourses and the Enchiridion, which means handbook or manual. The Enchiridion begins with this: some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions. That's it. The whole system. Right there in the first paragraph. Everything else in Stoic philosophy, every technique, every practice, every way of thinking about difficulty, flows from that one distinction. What is mine? What is not mine? And the practice, the daily practice, the practice that Epictetus taught for decades and Marcus Aurelius wrote about every morning, is learning to feel that distinction as clearly as you understand it intellectually. Because understanding it intellectually is easy. You read that sentence and you nod. Yes, obviously. Some things are in my control and others aren't. Of course. But then something happens. Someone leaves a critical comment on something you made, and you feel it. In your chest, in your stomach, as a flush of something unpleasant, defensiveness or shame or anger. And intellectually you know, this person's opinion is outside your control. What they think is not your business in the Stoic sense. And yet, the feeling is there. The gap between understanding the idea and actually living it is where all the real work happens. And that gap, I want to say plainly, takes years to close. Partially. You never close it entirely. But it gets smaller. And the speed with which you can return to yourself after being pulled out, that gets faster. That's the practice. Here's what I find most compelling about Epictetus specifically. And it's something that gets lost when people discuss Stoicism in the abstract. He was poor. He was physically disabled. That leg never healed properly. He had no property, no social status, no political power, no influence in the conventional sense. And he was one of the most sought-after teachers in the Roman world. Senators came to hear him speak. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful person alive at the time, credited Epictetus as one of his primary influences. People traveled from across the empire to sit in his classroom. Why? Because he said things that were true, because he had tested his ideas against real difficulty and they had held. Because there is a quality to thought that has been earned through experience, rather than merely theorized, that you can feel when you encounter it. And also, I think, because what he offered was genuinely rare, not comfort, not reassurance that things would get easier, not a technique for getting more of what you want, something stranger and more valuable, a way of being that doesn't depend on circumstances, a way of remaining yourself, remaining centered, regardless of what is happening around you. In a world of chaos and uncertainty, and the Roman world, for all its order, was genuinely chaotic, that was extraordinary. In our world, with its different but equally relentless chaos, it is still extraordinary, maybe more so. I want to spend a moment on something that often gets misunderstood about Stoicism, because there's a popular version of it that I think misses the point significantly. You see this in the modern Stoic influencer space. The idea that Stoicism is about being hard, unemotional, controlling your feelings by suppressing them. The image of a man who never shows vulnerability, who processes nothing outwardly, who responds to every difficulty with a kind of granite-faced equanimity. That's not Stoicism. That's just emotional suppression wearing a philosophy costume. Epictetus wept. Marcus Aurelius grieved. The Stoics were not trying to become machines. They were not arguing that emotions are bad or that feeling things is weakness. What they were arguing is much more interesting and much more difficult. They were saying, notice the difference between what you feel and how you respond. The feeling arrives. It's automatic. It's real. You don't choose it. But the response, what you do with the feeling, whether you act from it or through it, whether you let it drive your behavior or observe it first, that is a choice. And that choice, practiced consistently over years, changes you. Not into a person without feelings, into a person who is not controlled by feelings. There's a vast difference. Let me talk about something that didn't exist in Epictetus' time, but that I believe he would have recognized immediately: the attention economy. I want to explain this carefully because it's easy to say social media is bad and leave it there, and that's not very useful. The reality is more specific and more interesting. Here's the basic structure. The major platforms, you know the ones, make money by selling advertisements. The more time you spend on their platforms, the more ads you see, the more money they make. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's their publicly stated business model. So the entire design of these platforms, every feature, every decision, every algorithm, is optimized for one thing: maximizing the time you spend on them. Now, here's the crucial question. What actually keeps you there? Not calm, not satisfaction, not the pleasant feeling of having read something interesting. Emotional activation. Outrage keeps you scrolling. Fear keeps you scrolling. Envy keeps you scrolling. Desire keeps you scrolling. Tribal conflict, us versus them, keeps you scrolling. Anxiety about what you might be missing keeps you scrolling. Calm does not keep you scrolling. Contentment does not keep you scrolling. The feeling that you've had enough and can close the app and go do something else, that is precisely the feeling these systems are designed to prevent. So by pure economic logic, not by any sinister master plan, but simply by the incentives of the system, we have built and handed to ourselves machines that are specifically optimized to keep us in a state of emotional agitation. And we carry these machines with us everywhere. We sleep next to them. We check them within the first 60 seconds of waking. We bring them to the dinner table, to conversations with our children, to moments that used to be quiet. The average person checks their phone somewhere between 100 and 200 times per day. Some studies put the number higher. The number of individual screen touches is in the thousands. Thousands. And each of those moments, each time you pick up the phone, you are exposing yourself to a system whose purpose is to produce emotional activation, whose economic interest is directly opposed to your internal peace. Think about that clearly for a moment. You have voluntarily taken into your daily life a device that is financially incentivized to make you anxious, envious, outraged, and afraid. Because those states keep you engaged. Because engagement is the product you are providing to advertisers. You are not the customer of these platforms. You are the product. Now, here's what this actually does to the brain over time. And I want to be specific here, because the general complaint about phones and social media is so widespread that it has become almost background noise, something everyone agrees with and nobody takes seriously. The specific thing that happens is this: your tolerance for low stimulation states decreases. Think of it like spice tolerance. If you eat very spicy food every day for a year, your sense of what counts as spicy recalibrates. Mild spice that used to taste notable now tastes like nothing. Your baseline has shifted. The same thing happens with stimulation. Your brain adapts to the level of stimulation it regularly receives. When that level is consistently high, notifications, short videos, rapid cuts, outrage, novelty, comparison, more novelty, your baseline recalibrates upward. And then, when stimulation is absent, when you sit quietly, when there's nothing happening, when you're just in a room with your thoughts, it feels intolerable. Not just boring, actively uncomfortable, like something is wrong. And so you reach for the phone, not because you want something specific, not because you're bored in the old-fashioned sense, but because the absence of stimulation has become an unpleasant state that your brain now registers as a problem to be solved. This is not a moral failing, this is neuroscience, but the consequences are significant, because that low stimulation state, that quiet, that apparent boredom, is where a lot of important things happen. It's where creative thoughts emerge, where problems that seemed intractable suddenly become clear, where you have the kind of conversation with yourself that helps you understand what you actually want and value, where grief processes, where decisions get made from something real rather than from the pressure of the moment. When that space disappears, when the quiet becomes intolerable, you lose access to all of those things. And you don't necessarily notice because you're always busy, always stimulated, always engaged. But something is missing, and you can feel it even if you can't name it. I notice this in myself. I want to be honest about that. I know what I should do in the morning. I know that the first 30 minutes after waking, before any screen, before any news, before any external input, that those 30 minutes set something in the nervous system that affects the whole day. I know this from experience. I know it from reading. I know it clearly. And I still, regularly, pick up the phone. Not always, but often enough that I can't pretend otherwise. The habit is strong. The pull is real. And I'm someone who thinks about this stuff constantly, who has thought about it for years, who has specific reasons and frameworks for why it's worth resisting. Imagine what it's like for someone who has never thought about it at all. The design is powerful. The system is well resourced. And the pull is working against a competing force, the diffuse, long-term benefit of internal calm, that doesn't produce an immediate reward signal. This is asymmetric, and asymmetric fights are hard to win through willpower alone. Epictetus didn't have a phone, but he understood the mechanism perfectly. He lived in a world full of its own forms of external pull, political intrigue, social comparison, the Roman spectacle of public life, the constant noise of a large city. His students were often young men from wealthy families who were being pulled in every direction by desire, by social pressure, by the demands of their class and their ambitions. He wrote, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." For example, death is nothing terrible, for if it were, it would have seemed so to Socrates. For the opinion about death, that it is terrible, is the terrible thing. What he's saying is this: it's not the thing itself that upsets you, it's your interpretation of the thing. The comment someone left online is just text. It's the interpretation, that it means you're failing, that other people agree, that it confirms your worst fears about yourself, that produces the pain. The stock market going down is just numbers changing. It's the interpretation that your security is threatened, that you made the wrong choices, that other people are doing better, that produces the anxiety. Now, Epictetus would not say, don't feel anything, don't react, be made of stone. He would say, notice the interpretation, separate the event from your story about the event, and ask, is that story serving you? Is it true? Is it the only possible interpretation? And in the space of that question, that tiny gap between stimulus and response, there is something that looks, when practiced long enough, a lot like freedom. There's a specific modern phenomenon that I think perfectly illustrates the Epictetean trap. It's the experience of reading news, not because news is bad or because staying informed is wrong, but because of the way most people consume news now. You open a news app or you scroll a feed, and within seconds you are encountering events from around the world, disasters, political decisions, crimes, economic developments, scientific announcements that are happening in places you will never go, to people you will never meet, involving decisions made by people you will never speak to, about which you have approximately zero ability to do anything. And you feel things about all of it, strong things, outrage, fear, sorrow, anger, contempt. These feelings are real, the events are real, but the feelings are also completely impotent. There is nothing you can do with them. They are activated but have nowhere to go, and so they just sit in your body, all day, adding to the background static. Epictetus would look at this and say, you are spending your entire emotional budget on things entirely outside your control. You are letting events happening thousands of miles away determine the quality of your inner life. You are choosing, and it is a choice, even if it doesn't feel like one, to be disturbed by things you cannot influence. This is not what it looks like to be a well-informed citizen. This is what it looks like to be a person who has handed the remote control for their nervous system to random strangers. And most people are doing this every day, all day, without noticing that they're doing it. There's a concept in Stoic philosophy that Friedrich Nietzsche later adopted and made famous: amor fati, love of fate. When you first encounter this phrase, it sounds almost offensive. Love your fate? Love the things that go wrong? Love the loss, the failure, the difficulty? I remember thinking, when I first encountered it, this is something that privileged people say. This is philosophy for people who don't have real problems. If your life is basically fine, sure, love your fate. If you're watching your business collapse and your friendship end and your financial security evaporate, how exactly does love your fate help? But that's a misreading. And I want to be careful here because the correct reading is much more interesting. Amor fati doesn't mean you enjoy suffering. It doesn't mean you pretend things are fine when they aren't. It doesn't mean you stop trying to improve your situation or that you accept injustice passively. It means something much more specific. It means stop spending your energy fighting the reality of what has already happened. This is a distinction that took me a long time to really feel, as opposed to just understand. There are two categories of what has happened. One is the event itself. The business failed. The relationship ended. The money is gone. The diagnosis came. These are facts. They exist in the world. They are real. The other is your ongoing relationship to that event, your anger at it, your resentment of it, your replaying of it, your wishing it had been different, your conviction that it shouldn't have happened this way. The story you tell yourself about why it happened and who was responsible and what it means about your life. The event is over. It's in the past. It is, in the most literal sense, outside your control. You cannot change it. But the relationship to it, that ongoing internal argument with reality, that is in the present. That is consuming energy right now. That is costing you something that could go somewhere else. Amor fati is not love the bad thing that happened. It's stop fighting the fact that it happened. Because that fight is unwinnable, and it's expensive. Let me go back to the restaurant. When the business failed and the friendship ended, I was angry for a long time. And some of the anger was justified. I'm not saying it wasn't. Things went wrong on multiple sides. Decisions were made that shouldn't have been. Communication failed. Trust was broken in various ways. But here's what the anger was doing. Every time I thought about it, every time the story played in my head, the version where he made the critical mistakes and I was left dealing with the consequences, I was spending time and energy in a place that no longer existed. The situation was over. The friendship was over. The business was over. There was nothing left to do there except feel bad about it. And meanwhile, that energy wasn't going somewhere useful. It wasn't going into the next thing. It wasn't going into learning, really learning, cleanly, what my contribution to the failure had been. Because here's the thing about the story where it's mostly someone else's fault. It protects you from the learning. If it's his fault, then I don't have to look too closely at the decisions I made, the patterns I brought, the things I avoided seeing because I didn't want to see them. And so those patterns stayed, ready to reproduce themselves in the next situation. Amor fati, applying it to that situation, meant this. The business failed. That's a fact. The friendship ended. That's a fact. Both of those things are real and done and cannot be changed by any amount of my resentment or analysis or wishing. What can I do? I can look clearly at my contribution, not to punish myself, not at all, but because that's where the learning lives. Because if I'm responsible for some of what happened, then I have some agency over what happens next. The victim story is comfortable. but it's also disempowering. If it was mostly someone else's fault, I'm helpless in the face of future collaborations. I'm dependent on other people being better than they were. The honest story is uncomfortable, but it's also empowering. Because what I contributed, I can notice. I can change. I can do differently. I want to apply this to something more contemporary, because I think the personal example, while useful, doesn't quite capture how pervasive this pattern is. Think about generational resentment. Millennials, people born roughly between 1981 and 1996, have, as a generation, very legitimate grievances. The economy shifted in ways that were actively harmful to them. Housing became unaffordable. Student debt expanded dramatically while wages stagnated. The promises made to them, study hard, work hard, follow the rules, and you'll build a stable life, those promises didn't hold. That's real. That's documented. That happened. And there is a version of engaging with that reality that is productive. Advocacy, policy change, collective action, refusing to vote for people who make things worse, building alternative structures. And there is a version that is not productive, spending your daily inner life in resentment of the boomers, or the system, or the politicians, or the economy, or the generation before you. Carrying that resentment as a constant background state, returning to it in your head in quiet moments, letting it be the lens through which you see your own situation. This feels justified. It is, in some sense, justified, but it's also expensive. Because the energy you're spending in resentment of things you cannot individually change is energy not going to the things you can actually do. The economy won't shift because you resent it. The housing market won't become more affordable because you're angry about it. But your life, your specific situation, your income, your savings habits, your skills, your relationships, your choices today, those can be influenced. Those are real levers. Amor fati applied to this situation doesn't mean be grateful that the system failed you. It means stop letting resentment of what happened be the primary relationship you have with your own life. Feel it, name it, see it clearly, and then redirect. Because the energy is finite, and it has to go somewhere. The Stoics had a practice called memento mori. The phrase is Latin, and it means, remember that you will die. I know, I can almost hear the reaction. We're watching a Roblox channel, and the man is telling us to remember we're going to die. This seems bleak. Stay with me. Memento mori is one of the most consistently misunderstood ideas in Western philosophy. People encounter it and they think, this is about death, this is dark, this is morbid. This is the kind of thing that medieval monks contemplated while staring at skulls. But that's not what it's about. Or rather, death is the subject, but life is the point. Here's what I mean. You have a limited amount of time. I don't know how much. You don't know how much. No one does. But the number exists. The number of mornings left to you. The number of evenings. The number of conversations. The number of times you'll see the people you love. It is finite. And we know this, intellectually. We all know this. But knowing it intellectually and feeling it, letting it actually land, letting it be real rather than an abstract fact, those are completely different things. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this constantly in his private journals, not because he was obsessed with death in a morbid sense, but because he found that keeping the finite nature of time in his actual felt awareness, not just his intellectual awareness, changed the way he made decisions. He wrote, "You could live life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That's not a threat. That's a clarifying question. If you could live life right now, if this is, hypothetically, your last ordinary Tuesday, what would matter? The comment someone left online? The status symbol you're thinking about acquiring? The conversation you've been avoiding for 3 months? The resentment you've been carrying for 2 years? Probably not. what would matter is present, the people around you, the work that's actually meaningful, the conversations that are real, the moments you're actually in, rather than the ones you're anxiously planning or regretting. I have 3 sons, and I want to talk about what memento mori means in the context of being a parent, because I think it's particularly clarifying there. My youngest is 3 years old. When I come home, he runs to me. Not walks, runs. Like this is the best thing that has happened today, this arrival. Like he has been waiting for it. My 12-year-old, the one who convinced me to start this channel, he still sometimes comes and finds me in the evenings, not for any particular reason, just to be in the same room, to show me something funny he found online, to tell me about something that happened at school. These things are happening right now, today, this week, and they will not always happen. Not because something terrible will occur, though of course things occur, that's the nature of life, but simply because children grow up. The 3-year-old who runs to the door will, in a few years, walk, and then, in more years, will have her own life and her own concerns, and the arrival of her father will register differently. The 12-year-old who still seeks out my company in the evenings is already becoming someone more independent. That's appropriate. That's what should happen. But it means that the window for this particular thing, this particular way of being needed and present, is shorter than I want it to be. Memento mori, for me as a father, doesn't mean think about death constantly. It means feel how fast this is moving. Because when I feel that, really feel it, the phone loses some of its pull. The work anxiety becomes easier to set aside for an hour. The thing I was half present for becomes something I'm actually in. The Stoics weren't obsessed with death, they were obsessed with presence, and they found that memento mori was the most reliable path to presence they knew. There's a specific way this applies to the attention economy question from earlier, and I want to connect those ideas because I think they belong together. Cal Newport, in his book Digital Minimalism, describes something he calls the low-value activities problem. Most of what we consume online, most of the scrolling, most of the passive consumption, it doesn't feel bad while we're doing it. It feels like rest, like entertainment, like staying connected. But when you look back at an evening spent that way, there's a specific quality to it, a kind of emptiness, the sense that time passed without anything real happening. Newport's argument is that this is because we are wired for deep leisure, for activities that produce genuine restoration and genuine engagement. And passive consumption doesn't provide that. It provides stimulation, which isn't the same thing. And I think this connects directly to memento mori. When you genuinely feel that your time is finite, when that's not just an intellectual fact, but an actual felt reality, passive consumption starts to look different. Not wrong exactly, not immoral, but wasteful in a specific way. Because the evening you spent scrolling is an evening that won't come back. And what was it for? What does it produce? I want to be careful here not to become the person who is making everyone feel guilty for relaxing. That's not the point. The point is the distinction between genuine rest and compulsive consumption. Genuine rest restores. It feels something. You feel different afterward. Quieter, more whole, ready. Compulsive consumption depletes. It takes something. You feel more tired, more empty, vaguely dissatisfied. And you need more of it to maintain even that unsatisfying baseline. If your time is finite, and it is, which of those are you spending it on? Self-discipline is everywhere in the culture right now. Wake at 5 a.m., cold shower before the sun rises, gym at 6, journal before 7. No phone for the first 90 minutes. Meditate, read, optimize the first 2 hours of the day so that everything else falls into place. I'm not here to mock any of that. Some of it is genuinely useful. The basic impulse to be intentional about how you start your day rather than immediately reactive is solid. But there is something in the modern self-discipline culture that I think Epictetus would find confused, maybe even troubling. And it's this. A significant portion of modern self-discipline is performance. Not in a cynical or dishonest way necessarily, but in the structural sense that it is designed to be seen, to be posted, to build an identity that others will witness and validate. The 5 a.m. wake-up post, the gym check-in, the "I read 50 pages before most people are awake" caption, the cold plunge content, the productivity system walkthrough. None of this is necessarily bad. Accountability can be useful. Community can be motivating. But when the discipline exists substantially for the purpose of being seen, when the primary fuel is the external validation rather than the internal result, then you are still, in the Epictetean sense, dependent on external things for your internal state. You've found a socially approved form of the same dependency. Your peace still depends on how many people like the post. Your sense of doing well still requires the metric of other people acknowledging it. The moment the views drop, or the likes decline, or the community moves on to someone else, the foundation shakes, because it was built on something external. Real discipline, the kind Epictetus was talking about, is invisible. It happens at 11 p.m. when you could keep scrolling, or you could put the phone down. Nobody sees that. There is no post. There is no validation. There is just the choice. It happens in the moment when you feel the surge of anger, at a comment, at a driver who cut you off, at a piece of news, and instead of reacting, you pause. You notice the feeling. You choose your response. Nobody applauds that. Nobody sees it except you. It happens in the work you do, when you feel like quitting, but you don't. Not dramatically. Not with great effort that you will later describe in a video. Just quietly, without ceremony, you continue. That's the discipline that actually matters. And the reason it's rare is precisely because it has no audience. There is a question I want to raise here that I think most self-improvement content avoids because it's uncomfortable. Are you disciplined because you're building towards something real? Or are you disciplined because stopping feels like dying? I've met and I've been both versions, and they look identical from the outside. Both wake up early, both work long hours, both produce things consistently, but one of them is growing and one of them is running. The one who is growing has some internal sense of direction, of what matters, of why the work is worth doing. When they push hard, it's because something real is being built. And when they rest, when they genuinely stop, they feel restored. Not guilty, not anxious, not like they're falling behind. The one who is running is using discipline as avoidance. The activity prevents the silence. The productivity prevents the questions. As long as they're doing, they don't have to feel whatever it is they're trying not to feel. Hustle culture feeds the second one. It takes the anxiety about being enough and channels it into more production. And the production temporarily relieves the anxiety, which requires more production to relieve the next wave of anxiety. And this can go on for years, long enough that you build real things, but underneath, something has not been addressed. And eventually, through burnout or through the collapse of something central, or through the simple exhaustion of maintaining the pace, you stop. And there it is, what you were running from. I'm not saying don't work hard. I work very hard. 5 channels, English now starting, family of 7, financial pressure, health issues. I am not advocating for ease. I'm saying know the difference between building and running. Because the strategies are different, the sustainability is different, and the internal experience is completely different. Here's what Epictetus would say the alternative looks like: discipline that comes from inside, from values, from a genuine sense of what matters and why. Not I must be productive or I have no value, but this work matters to me. This thing I'm building is real, and so I'm going to show up for it, consistently, without ceremony, whether anyone is watching or not, because that's the kind of person I've decided to be. That discipline is quieter. It's not dramatic. It doesn't make good content. But it's sustainable in a way that performance discipline almost never is. And it produces a different quality of life. Because you're not constantly fighting yourself. You're not constantly in need of external validation to maintain your sense of doing okay. You do the work because the work matters. And then you stop because you need to stop. And both of those feel right. That's what he was pointing at. Not rigidity, not suppression, not the performance of strength, just internal coherence. A self that knows what it's for and acts accordingly. I want to add something that isn't always part of Stoicism discussions, but that I think belongs here. The modern world has a particular pathology that I notice in myself and in almost everyone I know. We've become obsessed with ourselves, not in an arrogant way necessarily, in an anxious, self-monitoring, constantly evaluating way. How am I doing? Am I growing enough? Am I happy enough? Am I performing well enough? Is my mental health in good shape? Am I optimizing correctly? Am I the person I'm supposed to be? The self-help industry is enormous. The therapy industry is enormous. The content about personal development, personal optimization, personal transformation is enormous. And there is real value in self-knowledge. Real value in understanding your patterns, your history, the ways your past shapes your present. This is not something to dismiss. But somewhere, something tipped. And now a significant portion of people spend a very large amount of their mental energy examining themselves, analyzing themselves, worrying about themselves, consuming content about how to be better versions of themselves. And they report, paradoxically, feeling more anxious, more uncertain, more lost than people who grew up before this culture existed. The Stoics would not be surprised, because they believed deeply that the self becomes healthy not through endless self-examination, but through engagement with something larger than itself. Community, responsibility to others, work that has a purpose beyond personal development. Epictetus spoke frequently about what he called our social nature. We are not individual units optimizing in isolation. We are parts of communities, families, cities, the human species. And our flourishing is connected to that community in ways that can't be reduced to personal development. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, wrote about this with striking consistency. He had the most individually powerful position imaginable, and he wrote almost obsessively about his obligations to others, about what he owed the people around him, about service as the antidote to self-absorption. What injures the hive injures the bee. I think about this in the context of parenting. When I'm in a mode of maximum self-focus, worrying about my own productivity, my own finances, my own development, I am, paradoxically, often less present for my children, less available, less genuinely connected. And when I'm focused on them, actually in the room with them, actually listening, actually there, Something in me settles. Some of the self-monitoring quiets. The anxious self-assessment recedes. Because the self stops being the center of attention. This is not a call for self-neglect. Not at all. Taking care of yourself, understanding yourself, maintaining your own well-being. These are prerequisites for being useful to others. But they are prerequisites, not the destination. The destination is something outside yourself, a relationship, a community, a work that matters to people beyond you, a responsibility you carry honestly. And that destination, that outward direction, paradoxically produces more genuine inner peace than any amount of inward focus ever has. I want to come back to where I started. My son. He's 12. He plays Roblox the way kids play games. Fully, without self-consciousness, without any thought of what it looks like or what anyone else thinks of it. He plays because he likes it. Simple as that. And he had this idea. His dad talks about Epictetus and freedom and memento mori and the attention economy. His dad plays no games. His dad is always thinking about something. What if we combine them? He plays, his dad talks. Roblox gameplay and Stoic philosophy, the least likely combination. And maybe, exactly because of that, something interesting. He was right. There is something interesting in it. Not because the combination is clever, but because it's honest. This is what my life actually looks like. A 12-year-old with a gaming setup and a father with a back injury and too many thoughts. 3 children, a small town in Hungary, a home office where I run 5 channels in a language most of the world doesn't speak. Trying to build something in English now. Trying to say things that are true. Not polished, not optimized, not performed. Just honest. The questions I've been thinking about in this video, the ones about freedom and attention and discipline and time, these aren't abstract philosophical questions for me. They're daily. Every morning the phone is there. Every morning there's a choice, even if it doesn't feel like one. Every day there are decisions being made about where the energy goes, toward what matters or toward the noise. And I fail at this constantly. I've said that, and I'll say it again because I think it's important. The philosophy doesn't make you invulnerable. It doesn't make you wise in some permanent achieved way. It makes you better at returning. Returning to yourself when you've been pulled out. Returning to what matters when you've been distracted. Returning to presence when you've been absent. Again and again. That's the practice. Marcus Aurelius kept writing in his journal, the one we now call Meditations, until near the end of his life, reminding himself of the same ideas in different words in different contexts. Not because he had finally figured it out, because the reminder was itself the practice. This channel is something like that, me thinking out loud, about ideas that have actually changed something in how I live, about questions that don't have clean answers, about the gap between understanding something and actually living it. In English for the first time, while my son plays Roblox in the background. If something in this video resonated, if any part of it landed, I'd genuinely like to know which part. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are. Tell me what you're carrying. Because I think, and this might be the most stoic thing I'll say today, we're all, in different languages and different circumstances, asking the same things. And somehow, talking about them honestly matters. Even here. Even like this. Epictetus would probably find the whole thing strange, but I think he would understand the impulse. See you in the next one.